The sun was setting on the quiet spaceport, casting long shadows across the rusted, abandoned ships that lay scattered around the landing zone. Tom, a mechanic at the station, wiped the grease from his hands as he stood up from under the engine of a cargo ship. His shift was almost over, and he was ready to head back to his tiny quarters for the night. The usual hum of the spaceport was silent, except for the low whir of a few maintenance drones. It had been a slow day, but just as he was about to call it a day, a strange sound caught his attention. A loud, grinding noise echoed through the still air, followed by a crash, then the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, hitting the ground hard. Tom's heart skipped a beat. The spaceport wasn't exactly the safest place. Sometimes ships would crash or malfunction, but this was different. This was the kind of noise that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He grabbed his tool belt and rushed toward the source of the noise, his boots echoing on the metal floor as he sprinted down the narrow alleyway of the spaceport. When he turned the corner, he saw it, a small, sleek alien ship, smoke pouring from the engine. The ship had crashed into the side of an abandoned storage unit. The hull was torn open in several places, and the ship's metal frame was barely holding together. Tom's pulse raced. It was a rare sight to see an alien vessel so close to the station. He'd heard stories, of course. The spaceport was located on the outskirts of a galaxy filled with diverse species, some friendly and others not so friendly. But an alien ship that was in distress? That was something else entirely. His mind raced as he approached the wreck. He had to help. Not just because it was the right thing to do, but because his curiosity got the better of him. As a mechanic, he'd worked on all kinds of ships, but he'd never had the chance to repair an alien vessel before. This was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. Tom cautiously stepped around the wreckage, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone there?" His voice was tentative, unsure of what to expect. There was no answer, only the eerie silence of the spaceport. As he rounded the side of the ship, his heart almost stopped. Lying in a pool of her own blood, a young woman, though not a human woman, was crumpled against the ship's broken side. She had the features of an alien species he hadn't seen before, delicate, sharp features with skin that shimmered a pale shade of blue, almost as if it was made from ice. Her silver hair was matted with dirt and blood, and her breathing was shallow. Tom knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he gently checked for a pulse. It was faint, but still there. He let out a relieved sigh. She was alive, but barely. "Hey, can you hear me?" he whispered, his voice soft but urgent. He knew he needed to act fast. The alien woman didn't respond. Her breathing was getting weaker by the second. Tom's mind raced, thinking of the quickest way to help her. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough about space travel injuries to understand she needed medical attention. Fast. He quickly checked her injuries, noticing that one of her arms appeared to be broken, and there were several gashes across her body, possibly from the crash. But it wasn't just the physical damage that concerned him. It was the strange device she wore on her chest. It looked like a piece of alien technology, and it appeared to be malfunctioning, its lights flickering sporadically. His heart pounded. Tom couldn't just leave her here. He couldn't. She needed help, and he was the only one around. Without a second thought, he grabbed his tool belt and started assessing the situation. The first priority was to stop the bleeding and stabilize her, but after that, he'd need to figure out how to repair her ship and get her to safety. He pulled out a small medical kit from his bag and carefully applied pressure to the most serious of the wounds. Then, using his tools, he gently worked on her damaged chest device, hoping to fix it long enough for her to be able to move. As he worked, his mind wandered. Who was she? Where did she come from? And why had her ship crashed so close to his spaceport? He couldn't answer those questions yet. All he knew was that he had to get her to safety first. As he worked on the ship's engine, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would change his life forever. Tom wasn't sure how much time passed, but eventually, the lights on the alien woman's chest device flickered back to life. Slowly, she began to stir, her eyes fluttering open. They were an intense shade of green, unlike any human eyes he had ever seen. Thank you, she whispered, her voice weak but full of gratitude. Tom blinked in surprise, not expecting her to be awake so soon. You're welcome, he replied, his voice calm but uncertain. I fixed what I could, you're lucky I was here. She tried to sit up but winced in pain, her face contorting with discomfort. Tom instinctively reached out to steady her, not knowing what else to do. You're safe now, he said, though he wasn't sure if he believed his own words. I'll get you back on your feet. As the alien woman looked up at him, their eyes met, and for the briefest moment, Tom felt a strange connection. Something told him that this encounter was far from over, and whatever came next would be nothing short of extraordinary. The alien woman's eyes fluttered open, her sharp green irises glowing faintly as she tried to sit up. Tom instinctively moved to help her, steadying her shoulders gently, but she winced, her hand instinctively going to her injured arm. Easy, Tom said softly, his voice calm, yet filled with concern. You've been through a lot, you need to rest. She nodded, though it was clear that she wanted to push herself further. Her gaze met his, and for a moment there was an unspoken understanding. He wasn't sure how, but something about the way she looked at him made him feel like he was meant to help her. I'm not sure how to thank you, she said in a voice that was low and strained. It had an alien melody to it, but the words were clear. Tom looked at her, unsure of what to say. He'd never been in a situation like this before. Helping a stranded traveler wasn't something out of the ordinary, but helping an alien, that was a whole new experience. You don't have to thank me, Tom replied, his words simple and genuine. I couldn't just leave you here. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak more, but the pain from her wounds clearly overwhelmed her. She closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength, before opening them again, more focused this time. I'm not from here, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. My ship, it malfunctioned. I'm alone now. Tom raised an eyebrow at her words. Alone. She looked like she had the strength to take on 100 men. Yet here she was, injured and vulnerable. Something didn't add up. You're not alone now, Tom said with a quiet smile. I'll get you the help you need. Her eyes softened at his words, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to relax into the support he was offering. She looked at her chest device, still flashing erratically, and then back to Tom. You fixed my ship's engine, she murmured, a look of awe crossing her face. That was impossible. Only my people can repair it. Tom felt a twinge of pride. He hadn't expected her to be so impressed by his work, but something told him that her species had technology far more advanced than anything he could ever dream of. He didn't fully understand how he had repaired the device, but his instincts guided him, and he had worked with whatever tools he had at hand. Somehow, it had worked. I just did what I could, he replied modestly, scratching the back of his head. I'm no expert on alien tech, but I know a thing or two about engines. She studied him with a mixture of curiosity and gratitude. Her face was unreadable, but her gaze was intense, as if she was trying to understand him on a deeper level. Tom shifted uneasily under her stare. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the spaceport, but then the woman broke the silence again. I'm Nira, she said, offering a weak but genuine smile. I didn't expect to find someone like you here, someone willing to help me. Tom's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her name. Nira. The name felt foreign yet strangely familiar to him, like he had heard it in a dream. It was rare for him to feel an immediate connection with someone, let alone an alien, but for some reason he felt like he had known her for much longer. I'm Tom, he said, his voice soft. I work here. Just a mechanic. It's nothing special. Nira's eyes narrowed as she took in his words. A mechanic, you say? She asked, her tone thoughtful. You did something extraordinary with my ship. I can't help but wonder if you're more than just a simple mechanic. Tom chuckled, unsure of what to say. I just fix things. I'm not sure how I managed to fix that particular part, though. Just lucky, I guess. Nira's gaze turned inward, as though she was lost in thought. She didn't respond right away, and Tom took that as his cue to move on with the repairs. Her ship still needed some work to be fully operational, but at least it was no longer in immediate danger of falling apart. I can help, Tom said, breaking the silence. But I'm not exactly sure how your ship works. I'm going to need some time to figure things out. Nira nodded, then gestured toward a control panel that had long been dormant on her ship. I will assist where I can, she said quietly, but my knowledge is limited. Tom nodded, grateful for the offer, but as he worked on the panel, he couldn't help but feel that something deeper was going on. There was more to Nira than met the eye. She was not just some random traveler. She was from another world, and that in itself made her special. And it wasn't just her race or her advanced technology. It was the way she carried herself, her strength, her grace, and the way she trusted him despite everything that had happened. As the night wore on, Tom found himself more and more intrigued by Nira. He wanted to learn about her past, about where she came from and why she was alone. But for now, all he could do was continue fixing her ship, one piece at a time, and help her get back on her feet. We'll figure this out, Tom said, more to himself than to Nira as he worked. Nira gave a soft smile, though it was clear that her thoughts were elsewhere. I hope you're right, Tom, she said softly. I hope you're right. It had been a few days since Tom had first encountered Nira. He had worked tirelessly on her ship, piecing together the damaged components with the skills he'd spent years perfecting. Nira, though still healing from her injuries, had become an unexpected help. She wasn't much of a mechanic, but her alien tech knowledge, though limited, had proven valuable in understanding the strange components of her ship. The two had grown into a quiet partnership, working together in silence as they repaired the various systems. Tom couldn't deny the strange bond that had started to form between them. He wasn't sure if it was just the shared experience of working on something so unfamiliar, or if it was something deeper. Regardless, he couldn't shake the feeling that their connection was destined. One evening as they worked on the main engine, a sudden noise broke the calm. A low hum echoed from outside the ship, followed by the sound of engines. Tom's heart skipped. They weren't alone. Do you hear that? He asked, turning to Nira. She was standing by the ship's control panel, eyes narrowed, her focus sharp. I do, she replied, her voice low. It sounds like trouble. Tom felt his stomach tighten. He didn't need to ask her what kind of trouble she was referring to. In his years of working at the spaceport, he'd seen all sorts of dangerous people, raiders, smugglers, bounty hunters. But something about the way Nira reacted told him this was different. She was on edge, and that alone was enough to worry him. Should we hide? Tom asked, glancing around the small space. There wasn't much room to run. Nira's eyes flashed with something that resembled fear, though she quickly masked it with determination. No, she said firmly. Hiding will do no good. They've already found us. Tom's heart pounded. He wasn't sure who they were, but it didn't take much to guess. Whoever it was, they meant business. Before he could say anything else, the ship's exterior lights flickered, followed by a loud bang on the hull. Tom jumped back, instinctively reaching for the nearest tool. Nira, however, was already moving. She stepped toward the door, her posture straight and confident, as if this wasn't the first time she had faced danger. Stay inside, she ordered, her voice firm but calm. Tom didn't have time to argue. He wasn't sure if he could be of any help, but Nira clearly had a plan. He watched her as she moved toward the control panel. In an instant, she was inside the ship's cockpit, her hands moving over the controls with ease. Tom could see the determination in her eyes, but there was something more, something sharp, a glimmer of strength that he hadn't seen before. The noise outside grew louder. Tom could hear shouting now, the sounds of boots stomping on the metal floor. He could feel his pulse racing, his thoughts scattered. This was real. They were under attack. Suddenly, the ship lurched, throwing Tom off balance. He stumbled but quickly caught himself, grabbing onto a nearby console. Nira, on the other hand, was already calm, her fingers flying over the controls, her face a mask of concentration. "Stay back," she said again, her voice steady. "This is not your fight." Tom didn't listen. He couldn't just stand there and do nothing. He grabbed a wrench from the toolkit and moved toward the door, hoping to help in some way. As he reached the doorframe, he caught a glimpse of the attackers outside, 4 heavily armed figures all wearing dark, intimidating armor. His heart sank. He didn't stand a chance against them. But Nira wasn't waiting. With a swift movement, she activated something on her wrist, a glowing device that Tom hadn't noticed before. In an instant, the ship's defenses came to life. A high-pitched sound filled the air, followed by a series of electrical pulses that surged through the hull, sending the attackers stumbling back. Tom watched, wide-eyed, as Nira stepped out of the cockpit, now standing tall and poised. She was no longer the injured woman he had found days ago. She was a warrior, and it was clear that she was more than capable of defending herself. The attackers tried to fire their weapons, but the energy shields that Nira had activated absorbed their shots with ease. She moved with grace, her movements sharp and controlled, like someone who had fought countless battles. Tom was in awe. He had never seen anyone, let alone an alien, handle a situation like this with such skill. With a final burst of energy, Nira disabled the attackers' weapons, rendering them helpless. The 4 figures fell to the ground, their weapons useless as Nira stood over them, her expression cold. "You picked the wrong target," she said in a low voice, her eyes flashing with intensity. Tom stared at her, still in shock. The woman he had helped just days ago wasn't just a survivor. She was a fighter, a force to be reckoned with. Nira turned to him then, her posture relaxing slightly as she approached. Her face softened, but there was still a lingering intensity in her eyes. "They won't be back," she said, her voice calm once more. "At least not in the same way." Tom swallowed hard, trying to process what had just happened. He had seen the alien woman as vulnerable, someone he needed to protect, but now he saw her in an entirely different light. She was strong, capable, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe toward her. "Who were they?" Tom asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Bounty hunters," Nira replied, her tone now less tense. "I have enemies. I've been running from them for a long time." Tom nodded slowly, feeling a mix of emotions. He was grateful she had protected them both, but he also knew that this encounter was only the beginning. There was much more to Nira's story than he had realized, and for some reason Tom felt like he was now a part of it. The night after the bounty hunters had been defeated, the atmosphere around the ship was quieter than ever. The energy from the brief confrontation still hung in the air, but as the hours passed, everything fell back into a strange calm. Tom sat at a makeshift table in the corner of the ship, cleaning his tools, his thoughts spinning. He had always known that life in space could be unpredictable, but this was something he never expected. A few days ago, he was just a mechanic, working on ships for a living. Now he found himself in the middle of something far bigger, something far more dangerous. And it wasn't just the aliens or the bounty hunters. It was Nira. The connection between them had grown in ways he couldn't explain, but he could feel it every time they shared a glance or exchanged a word. As Tom worked, Nira stayed by the control panel, her back to him. The only sound in the ship was the soft hum of the engines. It was a peaceful moment, but Tom knew it wouldn't last long. They were still vulnerable. The bounty hunters weren't the only ones after her. He had no idea who else might come looking for Nira or what else she had gotten herself involved in. "Are you all right?" Tom asked, his voice breaking the silence. Nira didn't turn around immediately. She paused for a moment as if considering how to answer. When she finally did speak, her voice was softer than he'd heard it before. "I will be," she said, quietly. "I always am." Tom felt a strange sadness in her words, but he didn't press. Instead, he simply nodded. He had learned that Nira didn't like to talk about her past, and he didn't want to push her. He respected her strength, but he could tell that there was more to her than the fierce, confident woman he had seen fight. She was carrying something heavy, something that weighed on her more than any injury could. "Thank you," Nira said, after a long pause. She turned around, meeting his gaze. "For saving me." Tom looked up from his work, his eyes locking with hers. Her green eyes were calm now, but there was a depth to them, something beyond the battle they had just fought. She was grateful, but there was something more there. He couldn't quite place it. "I didn't really save you," Tom replied with a shrug. "You took care of those guys yourself. I just helped out with the ship." Nira smiled faintly. "You did more than just help. You made sure I was safe. You didn't have to." Tom looked down at his hands, feeling a bit awkward. "It's just what anyone would do." "I don't think so," Nira said softly. "You're not like anyone I've met before." Her words made him feel both proud and uneasy. He didn't think of himself as someone special. He was just an ordinary mechanic, a person who worked with his hands. But there was something in Nira's voice that made him wonder if he was part of something bigger. "What do you mean?" Tom asked, trying to understand. Nira took a deep breath, her expression thoughtful. She seemed to choose her words carefully, as if deciding how much she wanted to share. "Back where I come from," she began slowly. "People like you, they don't usually help those like me. People don't stop to ask questions. They just turn away, but you didn't. You fixed my ship. You protected me, Juan, and you didn't have to." Tom nodded, a little embarrassed by her praise. "I didn't think it was a big deal." Nira stepped closer, her movements deliberate. "To me it is." For a moment they just stood there, facing each other, the weight of their conversation hanging between them. Tom felt his heart race. Nira's gratitude was clear, but there was something more in the way she looked at him. He wasn't sure if it was just because she was an alien or if it was something else. But whatever it was, it felt real. "I've been alone for a long time," Nira said, breaking the silence again. "I've never had someone like you in my life, someone who just helps, who doesn't want anything in return." Tom swallowed, feeling the truth of her words hit him. He wasn't used to being anyone's hero. But here, with Nira, it was different. He wanted to help. He wanted to make sure she was safe. But it wasn't just about helping her fix her ship anymore. There was something deeper, a connection maybe that neither of them could explain. "I'm not some kind of hero," Tom said, trying to keep things light. "I just know how to fix things." Nira smiled again, this time a little more openly. "Maybe, but sometimes fixing things means more than just repairing ships." Tom looked at her, searching her face for any sign that she was joking, but there was nothing. Her eyes were sincere, her words honest. He could see that she was starting to trust him just as he was starting to trust her. "I know you've been through a lot," Tom said carefully, unsure of how to proceed. "But if you ever need to talk, I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone." Nira was silent for a moment. Then she stepped even closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I know. That's why I'm still here. You're not like anyone I've ever met, Tom. I don't know what comes next, but I think we're in this together." Tom felt a warmth in his chest at her words. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged, like he was part of something bigger. Maybe he wasn't just a mechanic after all. Maybe he was meant to be here helping Nira, and somehow he knew that no matter what happened next, their bond was just beginning. The days that followed were filled with a quiet rhythm. Tom worked on Nira's ship, making adjustments and fine-tuning the systems while Nira rested, recovering from the injuries she'd sustained during the crash. The quiet between them was comfortable, as if they had grown used to each other's presence. Tom had even begun to feel a strange sense of purpose, a desire to help Nira beyond just fixing her ship. But the peaceful days were numbered. One morning, as Tom was working on the engine, Nira's voice called out from the cockpit. Her tone was sharp, urgent. "Tom, get inside. Now." Tom's heart skipped. He dropped the wrench he was holding and ran toward the cockpit, his boots echoing in the quiet ship. As he approached, he saw the look on Nira's face. Serious, focused and filled with warning. "What is it?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Nira didn't answer immediately. She was staring out of the cockpit window, her expression tight. Tom followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop. In the distance, a small group of ships were approaching, their engines humming as they closed in on the ship. "We need to leave now," Nira said, her voice steady, but with an edge of fear beneath it. Tom's mind raced. The ships approaching weren't friendly, that much was clear. He had no idea who they were or what they wanted, but he knew one thing. This wasn't a coincidence. Nira had enemies and they had found her. "Can we outrun them?" Tom asked, his voice filled with urgency. Nira didn't answer right away, her hands flying over the control panel, running calculations in her head. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with determination. "I'll try," she said, "but they're not just any ships. These are hunters. They'll catch us if we're not careful." Tom felt a chill run down his spine. Hunters? What did that mean for them? Who were these people and why were they after Nira? "I won't let them take you," Tom said, his voice firm. He didn't know what he was going to do, but he wasn't about to let Nira face this alone. Nira shot him a glance, her eyes softening for a moment before she turned her attention back to the controls. "I've been running for a long time," she said quietly. "I'm used to being hunted, but this is different." Tom took a deep breath. He didn't understand all of it, but he didn't need to. He was here to help, and that's all that mattered. "We can't just sit here," Tom said, stepping forward. "We need to make a plan. I'm not just going to stand here while you fight them alone." Nira hesitated, her hands stilling on the control panel as she looked at him. For a moment there was silence, as if she was weighing his words. Then with a heavy sigh, she nodded. "All right," she said, her voice soft but determined. "I'm going to need your help, but you need to listen to me. Stay close, do exactly what I say, and we might have a chance." Tom nodded without hesitation. He wasn't about to let Nira face this alone. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. They weren't just facing a threat. They were facing something that could change everything. But he wasn't scared. Not anymore. Nira's fingers danced over the control panel as she brought the ship's engines to life. The ship hummed, and the lights flickered as the engines roared to life. Nira's hands were steady, her focus unwavering. "We'll try to take a shortcut through the asteroid field," Nira explained. "It's a risk, but it might buy us some time. We'll have to move quickly. Are you ready?" Tom looked out the window at the approaching ships. They were getting closer, their weapons clearly visible now, ready to fire. He swallowed hard but nodded. "I'm ready," he said. Nira didn't hesitate. With a flick of a switch, she sent the ship into motion, the engines pushing them forward with a surge of power. The ship jolted as they made the first turn, heading toward the asteroid field. Tom gripped the sides of the seat, trying to keep his balance as the ship swerved and dodged through the dangerous field. The ships behind them followed, their engines roaring as they closed in, not giving up. Tom's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he held on. "Stay sharp," Nira called out, her voice calm despite the chaos. "We need to get through this field without getting hit. One wrong move and we're done." Tom could see the asteroids ahead, their massive shapes hurtling through space. It was a maze of rocks and debris, and there was only one way through, fast and precise. The ships behind them fired their weapons, sending blasts of energy toward the ship. Nira swerved sharply to avoid the blasts, her hands steady as she guided the ship through the field. Tom could feel the heat of the blast just missing them, the sound of them ricocheting off the rocks and debris all around them. "We're not going to make it," Tom muttered under his breath, his heart racing. But Nira didn't slow down. She pushed the ship harder, taking sharp turns and risky moves to stay ahead of the pursuing ships. The asteroid field was dense, and she knew it was their only chance. They just had to make it through. "We're almost there," Nira said, her voice filled with determination. Tom looked out the window. The asteroid field was starting to thin out, and beyond it he could see the stars. They were close. He knew they could make it. But the enemy ships were still right behind them, not giving up. And just as it seemed like they might escape, a blast hit the ship's side, sending them spinning out of control. The ship shuddered violently as the blast struck, sending Tom's heart racing. He gripped the seat tightly as the ship lurched sideways, the warning lights flashing red. The control panel sparked, and Nira's fingers flew over the buttons, desperately trying to regain control. The hum of the engines began to sputter, and Tom could hear the faint sound of alarms blaring. "We're losing power," Nira shouted, her voice tense. "We need to get clear of the field now, or we'll be sitting targets." Tom's mind raced as he glanced at the pursuing ships. They were still closing in, their weapons ready to strike again. The asteroid field was no longer a shield. They were exposed, and every moment felt like it might be their last. "Nira, we can't outrun them." "We need to fight back," Tom said, his voice filled with urgency. Nira's eyes were wide with focus, her hands moving quickly over the controls. "We don't have the firepower for that. If I can't get the engines back online, we'll be sitting ducks." Tom's mind raced. They needed something, anything, to turn the tide. His eyes landed on the small panel next to him, a strange device he hadn't noticed before. It was the same one Nira had activated when she disabled the bounty hunters. It was her weapon, but it was dormant now. "Can we use that?" Tom asked, pointing to the device. "Can it help us?" Nira didn't answer immediately, her gaze flicking between the controls and the approaching ships. But then she nodded. "It's a last resort. But if we use it, it could give us a fighting chance." Tom's heart pounded in his chest. "Do it whatever it takes." Nira's fingers hovered over the device, her eyes narrowing as she prepared. "Hold on tight," she said, her voice calm but tinged with a determination that only came from someone who had faced death more times than they cared to count. Without another word, she activated the device. The entire ship seemed to pulse with energy. The room lit up with a brilliant blue light as the ship's system surged to life. Tom felt the power building, the ship's engines coming back online with a hum that was both powerful and terrifying. "What's happening?" Tom asked, his voice barely audible over the growing sound of energy. "It's a burst," Nira explained. "It will give us a shield of energy that can deflect their blasts, but it's not permanent. We have only seconds before it overloads." Tom's mind was racing. They only had seconds to make this work. "Get us clear," he urged, gripping the sides of his seat. Nira didn't hesitate. With a swift movement, she pulled the ship into a sharp turn, the energy shield flashing around them as they darted out of the path of the incoming fire. The pursuing ships fired once again, but their blasts were absorbed by the energy shield, dissipating harmlessly into the air. Tom's breath caught in his throat. They had done it. They had a moment of safety. But it wasn't over. The enemy ships were still on their tail, and Nira knew they couldn't keep using the energy shield for long. The strain on the ship's systems was too much. They had to find a way to escape for good. "We need to break their pursuit," Nira said, her voice steady but urgent. "But we can't keep running like this." Tom nodded, his mind racing. He knew what they needed: a plan. They couldn't outrun them forever, and they couldn't keep relying on the shield. But what could they do? Then it hit him. There was one last chance. "One way they could turn the tables on their pursuers, Nira," Tom said, his voice sharp. "What if we use the asteroid field again? The same way we came in, but with a twist." Nira turned to him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "We can use the asteroids to our advantage. We don't need to outrun them. We need to lose them. We can navigate through the field, using the rocks as cover. They'll follow us, but we'll set up an ambush. We can break off into a new direction when they least expect it." Nira's eyes lit up. "That might just work," she said, her fingers moving over the controls. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." Tom didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." With a deep breath, Nira veered the ship back toward the asteroid field, weaving between the massive rocks at breakneck speed. The enemy ships were still behind them, not giving up, not yet realizing what was happening. Nira's voice was focused as she navigated the ship with precision. "Stay alert. They'll be right behind us. We need to stay one step ahead." Tom nodded, his heart racing. The ship darted and weaved through the asteroids, the rocks flashing past them like meteors. The pursuing ships followed, getting closer with each passing moment. But then Nira made a sharp turn, sending the ship hurtling in the opposite direction. The pursuers didn't expect it, and in that moment, they lost their advantage. The enemy ships were thrown off course, and Nira had them exactly where she wanted them. "Now!" Nira shouted, her voice filled with a fierce triumph. "Get ready!" Tom didn't need to be told twice. He hit the emergency button, releasing a burst of energy that sent their ship surging forward at lightning speed. The pursuers were left in the dust, their ship struggling to catch up. As they broke free of the asteroid field, Nira's voice was filled with relief. "We did it. They're gone." Tom let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They had made it. But there was something else in the air, a quiet understanding between them. They had survived together. And in that moment, Tom realized that they weren't just two people caught in a dangerous game. They were something more. A team. Nira turned to him then, her eyes softer than before. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Tom smiled, his heart full. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "I'd do it again. All of it." She smiled back, a look of genuine appreciation on her face. "I know," she said. "But still, thank you. You've given me something I never thought I'd have. Again, a chance, and for that I'll be forever grateful." Tom looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He would face it with Nira by his side. The stars twinkled outside the ship's window, a serene contrast to the chaos they had just survived. The asteroid field was now far behind them, and the ships that had chased them were lost in the vastness of space. Tom sat back in his seat, his body still tense from the adrenaline rush, but a sense of relief washed over him. They were safe for now. Nira sat beside him, her hands resting on the controls, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead. She looked more at ease than she had in days, though there was still a weariness in her eyes. The battle was over, but her journey wasn't. Tom could see it in the way she carried herself, a quiet resolve that told him she had been running from something for a long time. "We made it," Tom said, breaking the silence. His voice was calm, but inside he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They had worked together, relied on each other, and somehow come out victorious. Nira turned to him, a small smile playing on her lips. "We did," she said softly. "Thanks to you." Tom felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He hadn't done anything extraordinary, not really. He had just done what he could, what anyone would do in his place. But hearing her say it made him feel like he had made a difference. "I didn't do much," Tom said, trying to brush off the compliment. "You were the one who handled the ship, the energy shield, everything." Nira's smile widened. "You may not have been the one to fix the ship, but you did something just as important. You stayed by my side when it mattered. You didn't run when things got tough." Tom didn't know how to respond to that. He had been scared, yes, but he couldn't imagine leaving her behind. There was something about Nira that had drawn him in from the start, something he couldn't explain, but something that had made him want to help her, to protect her. "I'm glad I stayed," Tom finally said, his voice sincere. "I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't." Nira turned her attention back to the stars, her eyes distant for a moment. "I've had a lot of time to think," she said, her voice quieter now. "I've been running for so long, always looking over my shoulder, never knowing who to trust, but you made me believe again. You made me think there's still hope, even in the darkest moments." Tom's heart tightened at her words. He didn't fully understand her past, but he could see the weight it carried. Nira wasn't just running from enemies. She was running from everything she had lost. Her people, her home, her past. And somehow, despite all of that, she had found a way to keep going. "I don't know what's happened to you, Nira," Tom said gently, his voice full of compassion. "But I can tell you this. You don't have to run anymore. You don't have to face this alone. Neera looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and something deeper, something that made Tom's heart beat faster. She had been through so much, yet here she was, standing strong, ready to fight again. And in that moment, Tom realized something that had been growing inside him since the first time he had helped her. He wanted to be a part of her future, whatever it might hold. I don't know what comes next either, Neera said, her voice soft but steady. But I do know one thing. I can't keep running forever, and I don't want to. I don't want to be alone anymore. Tom reached out, his hand resting on the console between them. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. You're not alone, he said, his voice full of certainty. Not anymore. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. For the first time, Neera allowed herself to relax. She let out a long breath, her body sagging with exhaustion. Thank you, Tom. I never thought I'd find someone like you. I've been through so much, and I didn't think anyone would care. But you didn't just fix my ship. You fixed something in me, too. Tom smiled, his heart swelling with something he hadn't expected. Pride, yes, but also something deeper, a connection. It wasn't just about fixing a ship or fighting off enemies. It was about something that was growing between them, something that felt like a promise. We'll figure it out, Tom said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. Whatever happens, we'll take it one step at a time. Together. Neera nodded, her smile growing wider as she turned her gaze back to the stars. Together, she repeated, the word full of meaning. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a stranger in the vastness of space. With Tom by her side, she felt like she had found a place where she belonged. And though they didn't know what the future held, one thing was clear. They were no longer two strangers caught in a dangerous game. They were a team, united by the challenges they had faced and the trust they had built. They were stronger for it, and together they knew they could face whatever came next. As the ship sailed silently through the stars, Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. No matter what lay ahead, he wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Neera. They had each other, and that was enough.